We are in lesson 4. Lesson 4. We did pass this out last week? I think we passed this out last week. If you were not here last week, then I have some more copies. Who needs one? Perfect, says it. Sorry. So I've got 4 extra copies. So raise your hand if you need one. Last week. Sign is the Vanna White of Mount Vernon. She's passing out the lessons. So how many people remember where we left off? Kind of what I figured. So I did a mark. I put a mark there. Put a mark. We have discussed a few of the changes that are happening. Discussed a few of the changes that are happening with a partnership, an agreement, a coalition between a religious sect, a couple that are blending together, and some that are, and the Roman government, okay? So on the bottom of page 7, page 7. Yes, page 7. The council at Nicaea. Have people heard about this? I know we talked about it last week. The Nicene Council is a famous one. It's really viewed highly in the Catholic group as a turning point for their faith. They created at that point sort of a uniform process of things, some uniform beliefs. What I like about the lead up to this is that there was already some things happening. We've talked about baptism as being one of the big keys. A lot of changes were already happening, and then this Constantine, who was the ruler of the Roman Empire at the time, kind of wanted to bring in these religious groups and create some uniformity. Okay, so on bullet number 61, is that page 7? Okay, page 7, number 61, the first council, bullet number 60. Bullet number 58 says, remember that we are only in the 4th century and not long after the establishment of the Lord's New Testament church with his disciples during his ministry on earth. This hierarchy, organized under the leadership of Constantine, rapidly developed into what is now known as the Catholic Church. Catholic, the word meaning universal. It's sort of bringing universal ideas together into one uniform cause. This newly developing religious group, joined to a temporal government, no longer simply an executive to carry out the completed laws of the New Testament, began to be legislative, amending or annulling old laws or enacting new ones utterly unknown to the New Testament. Now, this is what's happening. So we have this religious group who has partnered with a government. A government is now a religious enforcing entity. So think of a government changing laws based on how this religious group believes. So they're changing laws, they're changing morality, they're changing structure of government based on how this new church group wants to move. So the church group is really dictating how things are going, and they have the backing of the government. As we mentioned last week, this is foreign to us because we don't have this. We are mostly allowed to openly meet, freely meet, and most religious groups are welcome to do that. There's not a State of the Union address talking about how we need to start adhering better to the Catholic Church laws and rules. The two are not married. Now, in other countries, other religions are doing this and have done this. There are Hindu nations, there are Islamic nations, there are Catholic nations. Like Ireland has been historically Catholic and has been ruled in that regard. So we see this happening throughout time, but really this was, and this isn't the first time, but this was the big one. This was the big turning point when he calls together on number 61, the first of these councils. I want to bring everyone in, and I want to figure out what we're going to do based on what it is that you believe. Okay? So he's bit and piecing this together, kind of going with who's fits what he wants. Constantine is doing that, and so we see that in 61. Now, there were more councils that came about after that, so he does this at this first council. The second one, as we talked about, there's a town called Constantinople named after him in 83-81. He's already gone. It was called by Theodosius the Great. They were present 150 bishops or pastors from different groups. More and more doctrines began to come out of these councils, thus becoming law of the land. So it wasn't that, and we've heard about this with religious groups. They change what they believe, they change a concept. They allow these people to be pastors or those people to be members, or they change a feeling or a belief, oftentimes based on social issues. It's oftentimes what they'll do. Very rarely do they change doctrine. It's typically sort of sticking their finger in which way is the wind going on a certain social issue, and we'll adapt to that. So that's what was happening, is they were now changing in these religious settings, changing doctrine, but it didn't stop there. That doctrine then became law, not doctrinal law, governmental law, country law, nation law. Once again, this is foreign to us, because if the American Methodist Association, I don't know, I made that up, if they create some new bylaw in their bylaws, it doesn't become national law. Every state has to adhere to what that group believes religiously. That doesn't happen. Well, that's what's happening here. So again, a little foreign to us, but that was the partnership that Constantine sought and got. 64, the first one of its legislative enactments was the establishment. Again, you want to believe in infant baptism, that's fine. Where the line gets crossed is when you make it law. So we know about law in this country. There are laws in this country that dictate behavior, dictate punishment, dictate all of that. This was, you will baptize infants because it is the law. Totally foreign, totally weird to us, right? But that's what they were doing. And so infant baptism became law in 416 AD. Infants had been infrequently baptized for probably a century prior to this. Insofar as newly enacted law became effective, two vital New Testament laws were abolished. By making law infant baptism, then you're automatically taking out someone who is saved and goes forward in baptism, and the requirement of being saved in order to be baptized. Okay, you take those completely out. That's what 68 says. And of course, our forefathers didn't buy this, and they rejected the new law. So they believed that believers' baptism, as we believe today, or New Testament baptism, was the only law for them. Why is that the only law for the Lord's New Testament churches? Why do we not baptize infants? Say again? They're not saved. Also,
you don't understand it?
Where is it? Right? Where, I mean, let's find it. Let's find it. Let's look. Someone turn to the infant baptism part of the Bible. Where is that? I forget. Oh, it's not there. So those sort of things. You're right. It was a belief followed by baptism. Repent and be baptized, right? That was the process. Those who believed in what God was doing were baptized by John. Then those who believed in Christ as the Messiah were baptized. That was the order. And so to a 5-day-old, a 5-week-old, or even someone older, a 5-month-old, could not make that step of first faith acceptance. Zion talked pretty early. She was about 6. No, she was like 14 months, I think, is when you started talking, or maybe it was younger. I don't remember. Yeah, you don't remember. But she was pretty, her first word, of course, was Rams, which makes sense. But she spoke, but at 5 days, she wasn't like, Dad, be baptized, right? She wasn't, I'm saved. And she wasn't, that wasn't a thing, because at that age, you can't do that. Okay? And so you have to experience that first faith, like you remember it. We talked about this at the association. It's a moment you remember. You remember that moment when you were like, Lord, save me. I'm not worthy of anything, but I believe in you. Please save me from the pits of hell. We all have that story for those of us who are saved. We know that moment. Mine was done in Lomita, California at age 7. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. And it was 90 years ago, or however old I am. It was a long time ago. But yet I remember that moment, and I knew it from that moment on that I was never going to see the inside of hell. Okay? At 3 months old, you can't do that. But yet we're told baptism is to follow in that process. So our brethren, our forefathers, number 69, their loyal churches, rejected this law. 71, they not only refused to baptize their children. Now, here's where you're going to get the alert. You're already breaking the law by not following the law of infant baptism. Here's where it gets shady, okay? They not only refused to baptize their own children, but believing in the baptism of believers only, they refused to accept the baptizing done by and within the churches of this unscriptural organization. Yikes. Whoops. So now you're going against the government and the church group that has partnered with the government. And you're saying that not only are we not going to do that because we hold to a higher standard, but if a person who was baptized as an infant comes to join our church, they need to be saved, and we're going to re-baptize them because the first one doesn't count. If any of the members from the church of this new organization attempted to join any of the churches which had refused to join in with the new organization, that salvation experience and rebaptism was demanded. That kept the line pure. We know that step 1 and step 2 have happened if you're a member of the New Testament church. And that's how it was taught. So to adhere to the instruction given to the apostles, that's what they needed to do. This, of course, in 73, this course, followed by the loyal churches, soon incurred the hot displeasure of the state religionists, many, if not most of whom, obviously were not genuine Christians. We talked about this. They hijacked the word Christians. Even the name Christian, however, was from now on denied those loyal churches who refused to accept these new errors. I mentioned this last week that I have a tough time just calling everything Christian, okay, because that's a sanctified word. That's an important word that can't be used just for anything. I told the story about in Montana there was a Christian bookstore. Okay, all right. Ended up closing down because the owner had an affair with the manager. So I don't know, Christian bookstore it was, but whatever. And so it was the religious bookstore. Okay, that's a good safe word for it. The religious bookstore. And so the word Christian really, we shouldn't be using it flippantly like that. It was meant for the Lord's New Testament churches, first called Christians at Antioch. Christ ones, Christ followers, Christ identifiers, Christ ambassadors. Not everyone is that way. They claim to be a Christian, but no other group has the right to that name of Christ. And so that's why that's a personal thing. You don't have to adhere to it. If you're like, hey, did you hear that Christian song the other day? I'm not going to be like, whoa, JoJo, not cool, man. All right, I'm not going to do that. But just know that the importance and the sanctity of that word, it really is a word exclusive to his church. They were robbed of that. In verse 7 or number 74, even the name Christian, however, was from now on denied those loyal churches who refused to accept these new errors. They were robbed of that. They were called by other names, sometimes by one, sometimes by another, either Montanus, Tertullianus, Novatianus, Paterines, etc. Some were called out based on their practice of rebaptizing those who were baptized in infancy. It was referred to as ana or re-baptizers. And so that was not a term, that was a term of endearment. Oh, you're the rebaptizers. No, that was intentionally meant to be a slang term for them. So you don't do it the way we're supposed to by baptizing as infants. Oh, you're one of those rebaptizers. Okay. And so that was not a term of endearment. We feel that way now and we appreciate the stand that they took. But that was not a good term. AD 426, just 10 years after the legal establishment of infant baptism, the awful period known as the Dark Ages began. What a period, how awful, black, and bloody. From now on, for more than a dozen centuries, the trail of loyal Christianity is largely washed away in its own blood. Talking to a couple pastors over the weekend about some things that we're doing, and I said, I used our famous quote, Winston Churchill's famous quote, that history is written by the victors. And so that's what we see, along with their actual still living bodies that were burned. Oftentimes the documents or records or journals that they kept were burned as well. And so they tried early on, and this is the Catholic Church, early on tried to their best ability to not just silence them or keep them over here, keep them quiet. It was a full-on eradication, attempt to eradicate from the face of the earth anyone who was contrary to what they believed. And so it was meant to be non-believer genocide, is what they were going after. And so, I'm thankful that not every single one is gone. They didn't get to every single one, or we wouldn't be here. We're here because of the faith and heritage that they continued to pass on. Okay. Any questions before we hit number 80? Thoughts, comments? Okay. Who wants to take 80 through 84, please? Number 80 through 84.
I will. Note on the chart some of the many different names borne by the persecuted. Sometimes these names are given because of some special or relative leader, and sometimes from other causes. However, frequently groups were named for the same people, but vary in different countries and even different centuries. Yet another council is called into order, this time 431 AD, where over 250 religious leaders, pastors, were present. They met in Ephesus. The fourth met at Chalcedon, AD 451, and were called by the Emperor Marine. 500 or 600 bishops or metropolitan, city pastors or first church pastors were present.
Okay, do you notice a bit of a theme here? These groups are getting bigger. They're getting bigger, they're getting bigger. And so what's happening is exactly what we see today. And this is exactly what Jesus did not want to do. Here's what we're seeing. We're seeing one Lord sort of over it, a human, and they're calling these councils in to sort of give direction on how the church is to go. So the churches at Galatia had no rule or power over the church at Ephesus, or the church of Philippi, the church of Colossae, or the church of Philadelphia, the church of Laodicea, right, the church of Smyrna, or any of these other churches. There wasn't a lording over. There wasn't one central person who ran it. Now later, that one's going to be called the Pope. But right now, it's still the one in charge So there's going to be a blending of Pope and Roman leader. You're going to see that happening because now it's a blending of the two. Where in the Bible is a central head figure, and he's sort of puppeteering all the churches from his domain. That's nowhere. In fact, Paul specifically talks about this, as does Peter, that they are individuals with Christ as the head. Christ is the head, not a, what is it, pontiff, right? Not a pope or a leader who's in charge of it. And so but that's what's developing. These pastors and bishops and leaders are all coming to the mothership to get, okay, what do we need? What are we doing now? What's the latest? How are we going to change laws and doctrines in our area? They're sort of getting refueled from the mothership and then going back out. Has anyone ever seen Men in Black? You've seen Men in Black, right? So there's a big ship. The big ship, not Lollipop. The mothership. And when it comes to attacking Earth, pew, all these little ships go out there. And they're pew, 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 or whatever, right? They're out there getting them, right? They're out there getting them. And that's the actual sound effect. And so they're out there getting it, but then when they go back, they all go back to the mothership. Well, that's what these councils were to come back, get your instruction, and go back. Oh, we're going to do another one. Come back. And it's 150, now 200, or 250, or 400, now 600. They're growing, and they're coming back. Because what happens is you get drunk on the power. You get drunk on the power. The religiousness isn't just you're in charge of a religion. You're in charge of law. That's a big difference. So it's kind of an ingenious way of doing it. If you want both religious control, morality control, which is typically mind control, and then you've got law control. You can or cannot go here or there based on what I say. And all of that is based on our beliefs, religious beliefs. So these groups are growing and growing and growing because they're all going back to the mothership. They all get their orders and then pew, there they go. Okay? It's actually kind of scary. That's why people aren't big on associations and all that. And I understand that. But this is like control. Like you're going to hear from me what's going to happen, and then you're going to go out and execute it in your area. Okay? It's not a coming together of individual churches. It's coming, getting fed out. So it's a pretty scary, but pretty. It's a definitive course that they took. All right. Oh, it gets better. Stick around. Here we go. Number 85 through 88. Who has that?
I'll go ahead and read that.
Please do.
During this council, the doctrine of what is known as Mariolatry was publicized. This means the worship of Mary and Mother of Christ. This new doctrine at first created quite a stir, many seriously objecting, but it finally won out as the permanent doctrine of the Catholic Church.
How many people know that the Catholic Church worships Mary? That's a big one. That's a big one. And so as we've talked about each week in this, it was sort of a can you top this with each of these generations, each of these councils. So they're going to wade into some really strange, weird waters. One of them is, I believe, is this. That this blessed Holy Virgin, right, which is what you hear, is the one who was blessed by God. And so because she was the instrument to bring forth the Christ, she needs her own set of groupies, right? Her own set of followers, instructions on how to worship her. That's not at all the case. Mary did nothing but follow Christ. She didn't demand her own worship. She didn't demand her own followers, create her own doctrine. She was simply an instrument used by God. Abraham doesn't get worshiped. Abraham was an instrument used by God. Isaac avoided death because God allowed him to avoid death. He wasn't to be worshiped. He was there as an instrument to push God's plan forward. And even when John in Revelation tried to worship an angel, he said, get up. I'm a servant just like you. So this idea of the pushing a narrative because somebody thinks, well, Mary's the holiest person in the Bible. Well, again, you get this chatter going and these backroom whispers, and all of a sudden they're voting to start worshiping Mary. Okay. This is one for me. This is one of the sort of eeriest, because this is so far off base. Blessed of God, no doubt. Mary would tell you that. She was blessed of God. Are you sure, God? Yes, Mary, you're it. But to demand worship, to have statues of her, right? Where is it isn't there like a Mary statue somewhere on a mountain in some town, some country, on some planet? I don't know. It's somewhere. There's one in Montana where they call it, I think they call it Mary. I don't know what they call it. Anyways, she's standing over one of the towns like this. And she's like blessing the town. Okay. That for me, that's a little eerie. That's so far-fetched. Because again, there's nowhere in the Bible. She's blessed, absolutely. She's a tool and an instrument just like other people were. But as we see in our progression of time, we're going to see the term saint being attributed to people because of them. If you have an older Bible or you've seen Bibles where turn to the book of St. Peter or St. Luke or St. Mark, all that's coming. And we're putting these people on pedestals where they don't belong because all they are is instruments and people just like we are. And so that's what you're starting to see, this sort of wave of making divine those who are simply human. And so that's what we kind of kicks off with Mary. All right, good reading, Brother Daniel. Thank you for that. Who has 89 through 95? 89 through 95.
It was early in the period of the Dark Ages when real potpourri had its definite beginning.
Okay, so that's kind of funny because potpourri, I actually like potpourri. It smells really nice. But this is different. This is a little different kind of potpourri. That's potpourri. This is potpourri. But yeah, anyway, so I thought that it's ironic that you're reading this because I thought that was kind of funny. So when real potpourri had its definitive beginnings. Go ahead.
This was by Leo II, AD 440 to 461. This, however, was not the first time the title was ever used. The title, like the Catholic Church itself, was largely a development. The name appears as first applied to the Bishop of Rome, 296 to 304. It was formally adopted by Cercius, Bishop of Rome, 384 to 398. Then officially adopted by Leo II, 440 to 461. And then claimed to be universal in 707.
So when you see this happening, there has to be one leader because the head is no longer Christ. And it's not individual churches that all have Christ as their head. We're now spokes in a wheel, and the hub of the wheel has to be one leader. Christ is this thing that's out there. We need a person. We need an actual person. A human who's there to bless, to be the face, to do all of that. And so that's what we see happening where they finally sort of 8th century, they finally claim, okay, this role is now definitive, in place, and is the person. How many people remember, a couple times in my lifetime, it's a big deal when a new pope is selected, however they do it. And it's this chimney, the smoke. Is that right? Am I getting this right, or am I mixing two different things? Am I right? Okay, so you're watching, and you're just watching in Vatican. You're just watching to see if the smoke changes color. Is that what it is? I think it goes from like black to white, or white to black, or maybe it's like in Back to the Future 3, where it's all different colors in the train at the end, or however they do it. But it changes color, so then you know that you've elected the new pope. And so the Pope has become its own entity. So we are worshiping Mary, and now we're kissing the holy ring of the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church. Again, we're making divine what is human. That's all we're doing. These are people. The Pope is, I'm sorry, but he's flawed. He's a flawed guy. And so that's why we don't put our stock and faith into these people. And now we've seen over the years the issues that these priests have had who are up on these pedestals. And so when you start doing that and put one human being in charge of the group, you're set up for failure. And that's why Jesus didn't do that. He said, I'm the head and the churches are individuals. This is how it's set up. Makes it nice and easy. Any thoughts, comments, questions on that? Okay. All right. Who has 96 and recap for number 97?
In some centuries later, declared by Gregory
7.
I forgot my number.
You're not Roman.
To be exclusive right of the papacy.
Mm-hmm.
As we close out this lesson, let's summarize what we have seen in the first 5 centuries, from Christ's ascension to about 500 AD. The gradual change from democracy to a preacher church government, the change from salvation by grace to baptismal salvation, the change from believers' baptism to infant baptism, the
Hierarchy.
Yes.
You had it.
Hierarchy, marriage of church and state, seat of empire change to
Constantinople.
Infant baptism established by law and made compulsory.
Mm-hmm.
You need smaller words for that.
I'm sorry.
People claiming to be Christians beginning to persecute Christians. The Dark Ages begin around 426 AD. The sword and torch, rather than the gospel, become the power of God unto salvation according to these new religious groups. All semblance of religious liberty dies and is buried and remains buried for many centuries. Loyal New Testament churches, by whatever name called, are hunted and hounded to the utmost limit of the new Catholic temporal power. Remnants scattered over the world and fighting uncertain hiding places in forests and mountains, valleys, dens, and caves of the earth.
Okay, so when you're the law of the land and that doesn't mesh with what you believe, when you don't adhere to the law of this new religious group that has assumed control of the government, then you're going to find caves, dens, valleys, forests. You're going to go in hiding, because it turns from a difference in belief for religion to law, and that's where they cross the line. We're all for religious liberty. Jesus called them out, but he didn't say he didn't lash out at them because they were a different faith. He went after the Pharisees because because of who they were, their character, and also they needed to fall in line with what God was doing. These guys are just, again, that's why we saw the uprising already happening. 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century. These seeds grow. You plant a seed, it eventually grows and grows and grows and grows. And that's what we're seeing. So now they're worshiping Mary. They have a pope. And that's why this is happening. And now, because it's law, they're going after the lawbreakers. The lawbreakers don't adhere to what we as the Catholic Church decide for the government. And so we're going to go hunt down, chase, pursue, and annihilate the lawbreakers. Who are the lawbreakers? And so that's where it gets wonky. And so we're going to see as we continue. Let's pull out the chart on the back of the book. Let's check that out. So if you look at the bottom, you see a lot of different names So again, to describe the chart, you see here, and I'm doing some research on how to blow this thing up, and how to make it big and maybe put it somewhere, just even if it's temporary. I know there was one here before that went. It's no longer here, and so we're gonna make one. So I'm gonna make one, and so we're gonna take this and blow it up. So that way we're not all doing this, or I'm not doing this. This is awkward. And so you can see where there are different names. You'll see them here. Montanus, Novatians, Paterins. We see this Paulicians, these different names. They were given different names. These are the ones who were following the example of Christ. So they didn't have the hierarchy. They didn't have the baptismal regeneration, the infant baptism. They were refusing to do that. But in history, we find them with different names. And look, this line wasn't always pure. There are some groups here that eventually caved. And so they fell away too. But each, because we're told, remember our verses are Matthew 16:18 and Matthew 28:18 through 20. We see that we're told by Christ himself that they will be taken care of until the end of the age. They will exist on earth until the end of the age. So by whatever name, here's this heritage. And it continues all through time. So this bottom line is a straight line of cohesiveness, of thought and belief in Christ's church. This are all the different religions at the top, okay? And they skew off, and you can see the different things that they believe. We're going to get into indulgences and purgatory, saint worship, which we've kind of talked about. How about this one in the year 1000, infant communion? So we're going to get into some weird stuff like this that they're going to do. And we'll get into that. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to take a little break from this because of what we're going to study next. So who's going to close us out with number 98 and number 99?
Next time we will continue to move in time down the chart to see what the next 700 years brings us, including another new sweeping religion that unites a historically pagan society into monotheistic one, but not for the Christ or even God the Father. A new movement emerges and grows in strength and continues today.
Okay, so based on time, based on how the book was written, maybe what his beliefs were, this new movement that is going to start beginning has a major impact on the Catholic Church. They go against the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church goes against them because they have assumed control around Constantinople and the Holy Land. So they're going to have one leader. Do you remember last week when I said, remember Constantine's vision? What he saw, how he saw it, what it motivated him to do. Don't forget that. Well, we're going to see another movement in the next couple of weeks where a vision was used, a vision to unite people under one flag, just like Constantine was told to do. Now, this movement is predominantly in the Middle East. But yet, as we know from, and we'll go back and look at it in the book of Genesis and in other books, and then later in Joshua, these groups of people, which the Bible refers to as the nations around you, these were what's known as polytheistic. That means they believed in many gods. They had a god for the moon, they had a god for the grass, they had a god for the hermit crab, and they had a god for the frog, and god for whatever else, the mice. So, they had a different god for different things, and they worshipped based on that. And so they were polytheistic. They had many gods. And that continued for a long time. So for the Catholic Church, that wasn't a threat. They were the other nations. Well, someone is going to have a vision and rally those polytheistic societies and rally under the banner of one God. And it's a total culture change for what has historically been this group of people. And so, and they're even they had no claim to the other stuff. They're going to look in their Bible, and they're going to say, wait a second, we came from Ishmael. And he was born first. Wait a second. I think we're onto something here. So we're going to see that. We're going to study that. We're going to not deep dive into it, but I want us to be aware because the group of Islam is still very much relevant and prevalent today. And so we need to know some of their background. We need to know how they came about and what their rallying cry was. We know what Constantine's was. His was to rally around the government, around Jesus, and steal some of the things from the church. How about this? How about taking does anyone remember Xerox, right? Like a copy of, we used to call it Xerox back in the day. It was like, you don't call facial tissues, you call them Kleenex. Okay, so Xerox was the same thing. That's a marketing. That's just for you, Brother Eric. So you take a Xerox of something, and you make a copy. So that's what they did. They said, okay, well, we're going to replicate everything. Not this. We're going to replicate everything, make a bunch of copies, but we're going to do a search and replace, right, in Word. Replace a word. And we're going to change this to that, 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 and this to that. Boy, there's a lot of similarities in the Quran. There's a lot of similarities in the Quran that we're going to see. And so as we study a little bit about this, I want us to be aware of what's happening. Again, we're not going to be Islamic experts, in any regard. But to have a good working knowledge, which is kind of outside the book a little bit, but a good working knowledge because they began right about this time. As they're creating popes and baptizing babies, there's this other movement that's about to happen. And that movement is as powerful, if not more so, than the way the Catholic Church is today. So, if you don't think so, turn on the news. Okay, turn on the news. So, they're very much alive, very much around, and very much front and center.